Regional Sales Director. I'm going to introduce two lovely individuals.
A lot of things.
I've got Mark O'Connor, who's the General Manager with Navisite. He's been with Navisite probably about 6 or 7 years. He still has his hair, which is a good thing, but has spent many years with AT&T, has always been in that data center and now cloud business. And then I got Kevin Nyberg, who is the VP of our Solution Architects and Solution Architecture team. So he's been with Navisite probably about 12 years, 13 years. So he leads all the solution architect teams in New England as well as across the U.S. So the goal today is really kind of educate you guys on cloud-hosted desktops, what people are doing, how it's different than traditional VDI, and kind of what are those use cases, right? And we're going to show you a live demo so you guys can see actually how it would work. And
we're going to go out on a limb and do a live demo.
On a MiFi.
On a MiFi, that's right.
But with that said, I'll turn it over to these guys.
Great. So again, Mark O'Connor, I'm the GM for Navisite here in the Northeast. And Jonathan, I think we have a runaway deck, so you're going to need to.
Yes.
Thanks. So I just wanted to level set you folks with who Navisite is, just a couple of slides on the background of the company, and then what we're doing with a sister organization, the CEN, Ocean. Is anyone familiar with Ocean in the state of Rhode Island? It's the Ocean State Higher Education and Economic Development Administrative Network, Ocean. It's Rhode Island, so they have you'll catch on to the themes that they have. So we're going to talk today, once we get through some of the background slides on Navisite. Kevin's going to walk you through the desktop as a service offering. You'll hear what VDI used, also virtual desktop infrastructure, and then we'll do a demo. So Navisite's been around since the late 90s. I don't know, has anyone heard of Navisite? Maybe? No? The marketing department at work. We actually came out of the ashes of CMGI, which was a .com holding company. Interestingly enough, CMGI's name was on Gillette Stadium where the Patriots played for 2 weeks. Robert Kraft was on a plane with the then owner of CMGI, David Weatherall, and said, "This guy's a flake," and went to the Razor guys instead. So for 2 weeks, it was CMGI field. And then the company imploded in the .com bubble. So I apologize if anyone had CMGI stock, because it's a four-letter word. So, sorry, Kev. 14 years you had, 13 years you had to. So we are predominantly a hosting company. In the last 4 years, we've been in the cloud space. The most overused word in IT, unfortunately. But and since 2011, we've been owned by Time Warner Cable. So in April of 2011, TWC bought us. Time Warner Cable, a $22 billion cable company. And if anyone reads the news, you probably know that now Comcast has put a bid out to purchase Time Warner Cable. So I never knew I'd work for one cable company, much less two. Interesting. Times we live in. I think the good news from a Navisite perspective, though, when we got purchased by TWC, they didn't do anything that we do. They didn't do hosting, they didn't do cloud services, managed applications. So we were in a really good spot. The exact same thing is going to hold true with Comcast. They just don't do what we do, and we're a little bit of a crown jewel within the TWC empire, and we're going to be, we believe, the same thing within the Comcast entity. So now you can go ahead, John. So real quick, I'll start over on the right-hand side and move to the left. This is what we do in 3 pillars. Managed hosting, so we do good old physical servers sitting in data centers, 10 data centers around the world. We still do a fair amount of co-location services. In the middle, you'll see we do a lot of, we did a lot of managed application services. Oracle is big for us, Microsoft, the Dynamics suite. We host a lot of email for customers, like Biogen IDEC is a good example. Harvard, we host their email for one of their entities. And then where we're going to focus today is on the cloud services and predominantly desktop as a service. So when we talk about cloud, we talk about compute services, infrastructure as a service, log into a portal, create a server, do whatever you want with it. A lot of storage solutions are wrapped around that, and then we'll talk about DaaS today. So I mentioned Ocean. I should have put the actual spelling, the acronym up here. But what Ocean has done, so Ocean's in state of Rhode Island, it's 150 members. So it's all the schools, the hospitals, the K-12s, the libraries. That Ocean network They lit our data center in Andover, Massachusetts, which is about 20 miles north of Boston. They lit that data center and connected it to their network. So all of their entities now have access to whatever we're doing for them in Andover, hosting desktops predominantly right now. Desktops as well as private cloud services, so that infrastructure as a service up on the top right. So it's a fantastic story for the Ocean members because now everything is on net. We can offer SLAs from their premise through the Ocean network directly to our data center in Andover. Now, why it pertains to CEN, we were actually introduced to CEN through Ocean and actually through a CEN member institution who's in New Haven that we actually just completed a pilot, a DAS pilot with. We're going to connect via Ocean in Hartford to the CEN network. So that institution in New Haven and everyone else on CEN will be able to get to us in Andover through Ocean. Does that make sense? So just some use cases, and right now it's been DAS specifically with the Ocean members has been very hot in the education space. So we have we're working extensively right now with Bryant University, with RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, URI, Brown University is looking at us for a couple of different things. They're running a pilot right now for DAS. They're also looking at us for DR. So it seems to have taken a foothold. The institution that I mentioned prior, New Haven, they're looking at us for kiosks. So they have 350 kiosks, and they want to deploy a non-persistent desktop to those kiosks. When someone comes in, they log in, they get a fresh desktop. When they're done doing whatever they're doing, they log out, the desktop goes away. Next person comes in, log in and get a fresh desktop. So that's the use case for that. That's that entity. We're with Brian, it's specific to classrooms. They want to serve up specific applications in a specific classroom, so we're able to do that for them. So there's a lot of different ways we can slice this, but we are seeing it in more of a non-persistent state. The use case and frankly, the amount of money you're spending where you can spread it across multiple users makes a lot more sense economically. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. I'll probably interject because I can't help myself.
That's fine. John, certainly feel free to interject as well. So from a desktop management perspective today, we certainly have a tipping point. And there are a number of reasons that are really driving us to reconsider how we do desktop management and change the way we do things. And maybe some of you are familiar with some of these. We've got shrinking IT budgets everywhere. We're always looking to save money, do things more cost effectively, and reduce really our spend. We've got a lot of old operating systems out there. The laptops, PCs running, XP, or in some cases older versions of desktop software. We need to move away from that to get to Windows 7 and some of the newer Microsoft or other operating systems that are out there today. We're seeing an increasing trend for remote access, both from an employee perspective and a student perspective. We'll talk about some use cases a little bit, but there are virtual labs out there that students and employees need to have access to. And there are a number of green initiatives. Everybody is trying to be good citizens, reduce their footprints, consolidate infrastructure, reduce the power, reduce the spend associated with power. Some common use cases that we're seeing in the industry today, from an education perspective, Mark mentioned kiosks. These are very prevalent in the education space today, as well as some labs, whether physical labs, virtual labs. There is a need for a number of different types of desktops in a lab environment. We mentioned remote access, distance learning. You can't turn on a television today without seeing some online program from a university today. And admin office workers. Again, there's a strong need, a number of different use cases to do things differently from a desktop perspective.
We're seeing, you're probably going to get this, but we're seeing a lot of, especially in the enterprise space, a lot of pressure for BYOD, right? Bring your own device, whatever it may be, but then companies want to maintain the security and the control. So fine, bring your own device, but we're still going to manage your desktop and all the data associated with it. So that's a big push for us. Not as much in the EU space yet, we haven't found, but it certainly is in the enterprise space.
Absolutely. So For the last few years, there's been a lot of talk about virtual desktops, virtual desktop infrastructure, and the thought was that this was going to be a panacea for all of those issues and problems and complexities that we previously mentioned. The promise of EDI was you could reduce your costs, consolidate your infrastructure, and provide a very good user experience for the user community. These desktops should be performing very, very well. That was the expectation. But as we've found in talking to a number of enterprise organizations as well as some other educational organizations, there are a number of barriers that exist. Doing on-prem VDI is not without its own baggage. And what we're finding out is that from a cost perspective, there's a large CapEx spend. There's huge amounts of money that has to be spent on infrastructure to build a VDI environment. There's a lot of moving parts. It's not easy to implement. There's a lot of complexity to implementing something like this. You need a very educated internal IT staff who's very familiar with running an operation like this to keep the lights on, to keep it performing well. And really, is it strategic to your business? Is this something that your IT organization or your company wants to be involved in? Do you want to be involved with standing up a data center, managing a data center, managing the infrastructure that's associated with it? Is that really a core competency and core to your business?
Now, I will say that there's organizations we work with that all those things they have done, and they've successfully deployed VDI, but then they get a directive from up above that says, how easy would it be for you to add 5,000 more seats to the environment we already have? And doing that as a flip of a switch is not an easy thing to do. So that's the other area where we're seeing a lot of traction is prospects and customers who have deployed an environment of their own, but now need to grow that in a rapid fashion and maybe shrink back down depending on seasonality or whatever the use case may be. That's where we can come in and augment what they've already deployed. So we can either do it all or we can do portions of it.
And the other thing you see too is a lot of organizations, they spent maybe $10, $15, $20, $25,000 to try to get a pilot off the ground with virtual desktops, but it never really took off. So they spent all this money trying to do something, and now they just kind of abandoned it and move on to something else. We're seeing a lot of activity of customers looking at the cloud as an option in the future, just because of the scale.
Yeah, that's a great point. I forgot to mention this when I was talking about Ocean, and this was my Rhode Island-centric joke. So I can't believe I forgot. But what we did for Ocean was we built 4 sandboxes for them, desktop sandboxes. Ocean calls them the beach. So keeping with the theme. So they have 4 beaches that they then go to their members and say, you want 50 desktops to try it, and it's free. So then they can kick the tires. They don't have to go make that large CapEx expenditure up front and see how it actually works with their actual applications.
So these challenges that companies have faced with trying to deploy an on-prem environment really has spawned a new market segmentation for VDI, and that is cloud-based, remotely hosted desktops. So some of the benefits, or things that a cloud-hosted desktop should have, should be IT friendly. It should be device and location completely independent. You should be able to connect to that desktop on any device that has a browser and internet connection. In theory, it should be much lower TCO than what you could do by implementing it on-prem. There should be no, or at least very little, CapEx spend, as well as low risk. And should have strive for 100% customer satisfaction. So these are all the goals of cloud-hosted desktops. This little comparison chart between an on-prem VDI solution as compared to a remotely hosted cloud desktop as a service solution. As you can see, VDI falls short in some of these areas. On-prem VDI falls short. Yes, you've got simplified desktop management infrastructure, and you do have centralized management. But in terms of having all of the backing, the multiple data center approach, having the 24/7 support, having reducing the complexity, moving the management of that infrastructure off of your plate to somebody else, that doesn't exist in an on-prem VDI solution. So there are a number of benefits, as well as being able to, from a cost perspective, paying for things as you go. You want to have a subscription-based cost model. You know, just pay for what you use, so to speak, instead of having to roll out all of that infrastructure up front to meet some peak demand. There's no need to do that in the DaaS model.
Or a utility model, the true promise of cloud.
And then one thing to note, just to, like, why people I think look at cloud desktops. You know, I took a school through our demo earlier this week. You know, they were looking at an on-site VDI deployment, right? They're going to put 100, 200 virtual desktops at the high school to take care of, you know, some of these computer labs, some computers in the classrooms. You know, within 2 days, he's got desktops now sitting in the cloud that he's testing with, right? To see what that experience is. So just that ease and scalability is what a lot of people have, you know, really embraced.
So there are really two deployment options. You know, obviously we talk traditional VDI. CapEx model, certainly have greater flexibility in the desktop options that you may have, as opposed to a physical desktop model. Is scalable and certainly is feature rich. But again, you've got all of the overhead and baggage of having to maintain that data center and the infrastructure, having the internal IT support to be able to maintain. From a cloud hosted perspective, it's an OpEx model. Again, utility based, pay for what you use. John just mentioned it's scalable, on demand. You need minimal internal expertise because all that expertise really is required at the data center or the solution provider. And you've got the remote locations, multi-data center approach. You've got the redundancy from a disaster recovery perspective, having that geographic dispersity that you can log into multiple data centers and have that same experience at the desktop level. So one of the key parts of any DaaS solution, and some of these are already touched on, you know, access from anywhere. Mark mentioned BYOD. You really should be able to access that desktop from any device, from any laptop, from any tablet, any smartphone, Chromebooks, different operating systems, iOS, Android mobile devices, thin clients, voice devices, the list goes on. You should be able to access that desktop from any device that basically has a browser and an internet connection. The client should automatically adjust to the changing network conditions to provide the optimal user experience and optimal performance. It should have an adaptive interface with intuitive gestures and easy navigation. And we'll show some of this in the demonstration in a few minutes. And you should be able to have different types of desktops, right? You know, Mark mentioned persistent desktops, non-persistent desktops. There should be session-based desktops. So there are different licensing models that you can take advantage of depending on your use case to try to lower your spend for licensing. And it's not something that you can just get email on or surf the web. I mean, these are powerful desktops that developers use, companies that are doing things with 3D graphics, gaming coders. I mean, there are a lot of high-end applications that perform very, very well on these desktops. So we'll talk about that a little bit.
We actually have a customer in Shelton it's 110 desktops total, but 80 of those are running AutoCAD, Revit actually. So it's an architectural firm. And we're hosting the desktops for them in Andover, and performance flies between Shelton and Andover, even for an application, an AutoCAD application, which you would think would be very bandwidth intensive and processor intensive as well. Now we beef those machines up, so there's multiple CPU, multiple gigs of RAM, but you can do that easily because it's all virtual.
This slide is really meant to illustrate as a division of roles and responsibilities that you should anticipate with any DaaS solution provider. Again, sort of this is the waterline here. Everything below this in terms of software support, data center facilities, all the hardware that's required to support the solution, as well as the expertise, the 24/7 support, and the expertise around that infrastructure really is expected to be provided by the solution provider. Everything above that line, customers have options. They can obviously provide all the end user support, the device support for their end users. They can provide that themselves. The image support, so the gold patterns, the images that you deploy for those desktops, you can manage those yourselves, or through a solution provider. You've got flexibility there. If you want to have that internal expertise and support it, great. If you want to go with a provider of your choice to provide that, then that's an option as well. Again, easy to get started. Regardless of what solution you choose, it needs to be intuitive, it needs to be easy, and I'll show you how easy our solution is in a few moments. Again, predictable cost. Trying to get this home here. No upfront capital costs, minimal internal labor, and it's an OpEx model. Security should be at the forefront of anybody's decision when looking at virtual desktops. You want to have the ability to make sure that it integrates tightly with your Active Directory. You want to make sure that there's encryption between the end user device in the data center, as well as any VPN connection or circuit connection back into your enterprise to access other applications. That's absolutely crucial. Single point of contact control, for all desktop management. We'll show you the enterprise center that Navisite can deploy. It's a very easy single pane view into the infrastructure where you can deploy those desktops. You get seamless connectivity with Active Directory and any of the application resources. And dedicated compute options. So there are obviously a lot of DAS players out there, but very few of them will offer dedicated compute. So having a dedicated virtual machine that sits behind that desktop. While the underlying infrastructure is shared from a total compute perspective, total memory perspective, total storage, you want a solution that actually carves out dedicated resources for that desktop. It's a better performing desktop. And of course, support here. So you want to make sure that wherever you go with offers best-in-class support. It'll stand behind a best-in-class SLA for availability and uptime. And obviously, with somebody who's very familiar with managing this type of complex infrastructure. Again, this is really a summary slide. All the benefits of DAS we've touched on. It's fast, flexible, low risk, no CapEx, very little, if any, operational skills needed within your organization, multiple data center approach for redundancy, and obviously tier role separation. It's important, again, from a security perspective, to make sure that the solution provider doesn't have access to your data. In this way, solution providers are able to meet your compliance needs. So while the solution provider will manage the infrastructure, the desktops themselves, the gold images themselves, and the data that sits on those desktops are not accessible by the solution provider. There's actually a layer 2 separation that defines that.
Kevin, I don't know if you were going to go into details around the actual underlying technology, but so we run this with a product. It was a standalone product until recently. They just got acquired by VMware a few months back, but the product is Desktone. So Desktone went to market. They're actually going after service providers. And to Kevin's point, the last thing that we're going to be able to do is go into a CEO's office and say, yeah, we'll be able to see your desktop. Oh, that's all right, right? That's not going to fly. So when Desktone built this product, they had service providers in mind and knew that we'd have to be selling this around. We're not going to have any access to your data or visibility around it. So it was really validation, frankly, that we had picked the right provider when VMware bought them. So now we're working real closely with VMware.
And again, a waterline slide here showing the separation of duties and responsibilities between the Navisite DAS solution offering and what the client's responsible for. And again, the responsibilities for the client, you've got some choices there. You obviously do it yourselves, go to another solution provider. And below that waterline is everything Navisite is responsible for. I mentioned before that you want to have options in terms of desktops. Not all use cases are created equal. So with our solution, we do have the ability to provide persistent desktops where the user comes in, is able to save information on that desktop, is able to save his own data, whether it's documentation, iTunes, it's called iTunes, bookmarking websites, things like that, so that when he logs out, comes back into it, it's there. Mark mentioned we've got the ability to create non-persistent desktops. So some lab environments, kiosks, healthcare organizations use a lot of non-persistent desktops. Nursing organizations. So they're in, they're doing their work, they're accessing the applications they need, they log out, the next person comes in, they give them a fresh desktop. In both of those scenarios, even though they're persistent or even non-persistent, they're still dedicated compute. Dedicated virtual machines sit behind both of those scenarios.
We're seeing it in help desks also. So if you have 3 shifts with a help desk, you only need to buy enough desktops for 1 shift. Right? And the next shift comes in, they get a fresh desktop when they log in.
And the same with the kiosks. And Mark was mentioning the customer in New Haven that's doing a pilot. Right? They're going to take 350, 400 kiosks, and they're just going to license themselves in a session-based thing for maybe 50, 100, 150, because that's what they see in that concurrency model.
So what I just described really is on the left side of this illustration. On the right side, Navisite has recently deployed a new product called Navicon Sessions. What we have found is that there's a great need, both from a cost perspective as well as a use case perspective, to have a single OS that multiple users can connect to via different sessions. Probably the best way to look at it is if you're familiar with a Citrix CEN app solution. This works very, very similarly to the Citrix CEN app. So you're reducing the licensing costs by having a single OS that's shared by many, many different users. We also have another application or use case here, ADP. What we have found is that some organizations don't want to present on the desktop to the user. They just want to publish applications. They don't want people to be able to get in there, open up browsers, store files, do whatever you might do on a traditional desktop. They just want them to be presented with the applications that particular user group is going to use. And that's really what the ADP solution provides. So really 4 different use case scenarios that we're actually seeing really a lot of traction for all of them. No desktop is pretty big.
And the thing too, you see a lot of mix and match, right? You have one specific use case is, I've got to deliver this to a lab or kiosk, right? I can purchase, 25 session-based desktops, right? Prove it out, as I have, other equipment coming into life or other use cases. The scalability is the beauty of it, right? You can just add desktops on a subscription basis.
Demo.
So in a moment, we'll make sure that desktop is active.
So Kevin's going to show you a desktop, right? We're connecting off of my MiFi card, to his desktop that's sitting in Andover. Hopefully.
Let's fire up this desktop. There's always a risk with live demos.
Ken, you just want to describe where you are?
Yeah, so I was actually going to come back to this.
You stole your own thunder, though.
I was going to come back to the Enterprise Center after showing you the desktop. But really, this is the administration tool where customers that are using our service come in to import their gold images, attach those gold images to desktop pools, and then tie users to those desktop pools. And what I did right here, I just wanted to fire up a desktop that I'm assigned to, the one that I wanted to present to you folks. So yeah, I'm going to get back into this after. Actually, you know what? Why don't we just start? We'll do the demo backwards since we're in there. So as I mentioned, this is the administrative portal where our customers come in to manage their own desktops. We want to make sure it's very intuitive, very easy. In this panel, under pool management, this is where you would establish the pools themselves. And you can think of a pool as a group of users that are really doing similar tasks. So you would have one desktop image that entire user pool accesses. So it's one consistent image, one image that you have to maintain, one image that you have to patch, one image that you have to have antivirus running on, that you disperse through pools to many different users. Let me bring up one pool here. We've got a pool for contractors. You can see here we've got 8 desktops in this pool. It is a static desktop type. This is the goal pattern. And again, in another area of this pool, you would import that image. You control those images. You import it here, assign it to this pool. From a virtual machine size perspective that sits behind this desktop, you got one CPU, one virtual CPU tied to that desktop, along with 2 megabytes of 2 megabyte of memory. We've got essentially 3 standard sizes. This is the lowest. This is what we call the professional size. We've got a power user that you can have 2 virtual CPU and 4 gig of RAM virtual machine. And we also have the ultimate user, which is 4 virtual CPU and 8 gig of RAM. Now those are our standard sizes. We do have customers that could possibly want more resource. We mentioned some of these graphics designers and developers, code developers. They can absolutely get a virtual machine with higher compute statistics than that. But those 3 are our standard. Let's see. We'll get into this in a little bit, but from a security perspective, you can control what the desktop can do from the device it's being launched from. So for example, I'm launching this from my laptop. When I log into this desktop, it will ask me, do you want to provide the desktop access to clipboard materials that are on your laptop or your tablet? Do you want them to be able to access any thumb drives or smart cards? Do you want it to be able to access any network printers or local printers? So that's completely configurable. We have some organizations that are really hyper security conscious that do not want the desktops, these virtual desktops, to have any access whatsoever to some of those things on the device that it's running from. But it's completely configurable. If I click on virtual machine, I can see the different, I mentioned there were 8 desktops attached to this pool. They're all named here. You can see one of them is actually active. If you click on one of those desktops, you can see some of the specifics for it. The protocol that this desktop uses is RDP. I'll get into that in a little bit. We've got some multiple protocols that we can use. It is a Windows 7 desktop, and as I mentioned, it's got 1 CPU and 2 megabyte of memory. On the mapping tab, this is where you would attach the users to that pool. So if I go down and look at my login, you can see I'm actually attached to, right now, 3 different desktops. So I've got a solution architect pool that I'm attached to, I've got a development pool that I'm attached to, as well as a lab that I'm attached to. So one user can be tied to many different pools. So you may have some people in your organization that across different departments, they may need access to multiple desktops. You can absolutely do that with this tool. On the dashboard, this really is a bird's eye view that an administrator would have into their entire environment. So they can see how many dynamic pools have been created, how many static pools have been created, how many total users are in the environment, as well as how many desktops have been deployed. In this particular case, you can see that all of these desktops have been provisioned from our Andover data center. We have the ability to provision desktops from our Andover data center, from our San Jose, California data center, as well as our DC in just outside of London in the United Kingdom. Any questions from a portal perspective?
I mean, the neat thing that you guys see, it's 4 tabs, right? So from an administrative perspective, there's no building hardware, managing hardware, right? Those 4 tabs, are the whole, desktop provisioning type of tool. So, very simplified kind of approach.
Kevin, I have an Active Directory integration question. As the desktops are created, what's the mechanism for getting computer accounts created? My view is like, getting WSUS on premise working via group policy, getting centralized antivirus that is AD integrated itself working so that it automatically installs the AV, does however you want to work Windows updates.
So, absolutely. So you can do all of that here. So, one of the things that any DAS solution needs to be able to do is integrate tightly with a customer's Active Directory. So typically the way something like this is architected, the customer themselves will have an Active Directory server on-prem. And that's really best design, right? You want that. You want to control that Active Directory domain. What we would do in our environment is create a virtual machine that is a replicate of that Active Directory server, create a trust between the two, and replicate. So you've got a backup Active Directory server in our data center as well. Through this portal, you would register your domains. We don't have to set up because it's a demo environment, but through this portal, you would set up that access info. So, what are what's the directory server name, the contacts, the domain controller IPs. So, I'll show you when we're actually logging into the desktop, how that can integrate.
Another question. Aside from printers, is it possible to have the USB devices connected to the physical?
Absolutely. Yep. You can control that.
Like web cameras and document camera stuff that's more intensive?
Yes. Yes, you can do that as well. Again, it's completely configurable. You decide what you want that desktop to have access to or not have access to.
What about smart boards that are more externally based for teacher machines if they're logging into that as virtual environment? Like the smart board connections have.
Is it connected to a PC?
Yes.
And it's
so everything.
Yep.
If you can launch a browser and get out to the internet, you can run the desktop. Let's hop over to the desktop. In just a time.
It's no different than how a desktop would,
All that.
would do it today, right? You have your image, the group policies you apply to that image. It's no different, right? And then we're connecting, either customers connect site-to-site VPN, or we can leverage that private network through the CEN in Ocean.
So this is the login screen that, again, you come to this URL, your user would come to a URL, it would be presented with this login screen. The login screen itself is completely customizable. In the portal that I just showed you, there's a place where you can define a style sheet. So, if you've got, you want to put your organization's logo on here, you've got different color palettes and different fonts, you can completely customize the look and feel of this for your organization. We've got a help button here that will actually launch all very detailed documentation on how to use the desktop and how to use the portal. So, trying to provide as much self-help documentation as we possibly can. We've got localization features, so you can choose a different language depending on where the user is located, the languages that they speak. That's all supported with this. We have the ability to use a single click sign-on as well. So as I go in here. We've got the option to automatically connect to a default desktop. So I showed you earlier, a single user can be tied to many different desktops. Whatever one you define as default, if the user selects this box here, it'll skip a step. It'll just log you directly into that desktop. You'll skip the page where you have to go in and choose the desktop that you want to connect to. Again, this is tied into a company's Active Directory. So, all of this can be tied to, the organizational units, all of the policies that are tied to that Active Directory unit. We also have the ability to provide two-factor authentication. We have many customers that are either HIPAA compliant or PCI compliant, and they need two-factor authentication. This tool will use RSA tokens as the two-factor solution.
And if you don't use RSA, any type of radius of authentication can work as well.
So we don't need to replicate our WSUS or antivirus server on your network. We can just use what's on our premise.
You can use your current tools on your premise.
Okay.
Absolutely. There are a lot of demos. Let's go to that environment.
Just Java-based or HTML5?
HTML5.
Great.
And then what Kevin was mentioning too, you can, right, so this supports RDP protocol or PC over IP protocol. So you can, again, choose which protocols based on what that user is doing at a desktop level for what you want to deliver them, right? General office worker, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, maybe the RDP connection's fine. If they're doing a lot of high-end graphics, those sort of things, maybe that PC over IP protocol is going to be better. And then there's the Chromebook support now too, right? So through that HTML5 kind of blast protocol, we can support those Chromebooks.
What's the name of that protocol for Chromebooks?
What is the blast protocol?
Blast.
Apologize, guys. If that's not working, fire up.
So if Kevin were to pull up a virtual desktop, it would look just like a Windows 7 desktop. Which was running, of course, an hour ago before you all logged in. It's actually a little anticlimactic because it looks like Windows 7.
Well, we can't put all the tech support locally out of business. We got to have them deal with the local hardware, right?
Yeah, we're coming up on 11:30, so while Kevin connects, hopefully. If you guys want to see this, we can give you free test accounts and demos and that sort of thing.